Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's a very different day in South Africa at the moment. We just have yesterday a confirmation of a new variant of the coronavirus disease. And also we're having a lot of rain today. So there might be also people I guess moving around. It's the end of their workday at the moment. So we'll see how it goes. But I've seen some of the people who have joined in here are very interested actually in the topic. So hopefully that will create a lot of discussion on here. So everybody, welcome to, this is the last of this year's seminar on data science for society. And we're really happy in this case to have Ishtiaque, who's a great friend. We both did our PhDs under the Fulbright Science and Technology Award. So we were kind of in the same period of time. And he's a great researcher in a space that I'm hoping actually our lab will be submitting a couple of papers for it, ICESWM, very soon. And we'll be very interested in seeing in this work. So he's an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Toronto and the director of the Third Space Research Group. His research focuses on the design challenges around strengthening the voices of marginalized communities around the world. He conducted ethnography and built technologies with many underprivileged communities in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, China, Canada, and the US. It's really great to have you on today. And yeah, we will start with this presentation, and then after that, go into questions. I will switch off my video, and then I'll suggest other people do accept Ishtiaque so that we get a good constant connection.
Thank you so much, Fukosi, for this your kind words and this nice presentation. Let me set things up before I start. But nonetheless, I'm so much excited to be here, so much honored to be here, invited, and being able to speak before you. And I'm also so much excited and delighted to see this initiative by Fukosi on this data science and social impact. As he mentioned, I also believe that this is a research direction that computer science and related fields are increasingly having, and it has a lot of importance to the world that we are moving toward. Different applications of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning are now being integrated in our society, in our community, and allowing us to see different opportunities for how we can reshape our community. Oftentimes, we find that this artificial intelligence technologies are bringing a lot of benefits to the society. And on the other hand, oftentimes we find that not being able to apply them properly is bringing more difficulties than benefits to the society. Focus of my research in general and the group that I have been working with, I'm so lucky to be working with at the University of Toronto, is to study these problems from the perspective of different marginalized and underprivileged group in the world who are spread around different countries, and to have a global understanding of whether or where, how we should deploy artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques, and what are the lessons that we learn from these communities that can be helpful for us to definitely protect themselves from the harms from these technologies, and at the same time build something that is particularly beneficial, addressing different needs of these communities. So today, particularly, I'll be talking about a project which is very new, which I started at the beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic. And definitely, I'm very sorry to hear about this new variant, which has been found in South Africa. And there is no word to express how much we are troubled by this pandemic, how much we suffered by this pandemic. My heart goes to the people who have sacrificed for this pandemic. And today I will actually be talking about a problem very much related to this COVID-19 pandemic, which has a very widespread and deep impact on the society. Namely, the project is COVID-19 related stigma and prejudice, against Asian population as reflected in Twitter posting. My name is Ishtiaque Ahmed, and I'm an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Toronto. So since this is the first time I'm talking to you in this platform, and so I will be talking about a bit of my own background and research that will help you understand my position in this whole space of technology in social, like a benefit or global development. Then I'll go deeper into the background and related work of this particular project. I'll tell you about the research questions, the methods, and the initial results that we have found, and then like the contributions that we have made and we are trying to make. This is still a very new word. There's a word that's in progress, and we are in a process of finalizing some of our findings, like initial findings, to get published in some venues related, also including ICWSM, as Vukosi mentioned. So now this is kind of a very early stage of the work, and I will definitely appreciate any kind of feedback and question that you have. And as a general rule, I'd definitely appreciate if you have any question, you can just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask them to me. Also, if you drop your question in the chat box, I will try to read them and respond to you, well, depending on in which stage of my presentation I'm in. So, as I said, I am now working as an assistant professor at computer science at the University of Toronto. I'm also a faculty fellow of the Schwarz-Reisman Institute for Technology and Society here, which is an institute which has been built around this theme of how technology can be used for bringing in like a positive changes to the society. And I'm also a steering committee member of Sustainable Development Goal Initiative of University of Toronto. Here I lead a research group called Third Space Research Lab at University of Toronto. I did my PhD at Cornell University. I graduated in 2018, and I definitely crossed my path with Vukosi and many other wonderful researchers around the world, thanks to Fulbright Science and Technology Fellowship. It's still like one of the like the finest memories in my life that I had with this wonderful people. I'm born and raised in Bangladesh. I'm a Bangladeshi citizen. Fulbright Fellowship allowed me to travel to United States and had my education there. I'm hugely grateful to them for that. My research area is in human-computer interaction in Global South, which basically means that I am more interested in understanding this problem from the perspective of non-Western population, as even in my project that I'll be talking about in a bit, you will see how I mentioned that how, and I guess like since like the now I'm giving this talk to the audience who are situated in the Global South. I believe it will not be much of a problem for you to understand how we need to think differently when we talk about computing technologies in a non-Western context, and that's where my main interest lies in. So I grew up in Bangladesh in 1990s when it's a bit of like my personal background and how I came to this space. So when I was growing up in Bangladesh in 1990s, I found that a lot of computing technologies were coming into the country, including like computers, laptops, mobile phones, internet, then smartphones. They were like flooding the local market, and they definitely were bringing a lot of changes to people's life. And these technologies were creating opportunities for millions of the people around the world. Now, the question that I had in my mind was that the changes that these technologies were bringing to people's life, were those the changes that these people actually wanted? Or these are the changes that these technologies are bringing for making their own business, and people were just being played with these technologies. So these questions, were playing in my mind while growing up. And when I graduated with computer science degree from Bangladesh, with my undergraduate degree, I set my goal to understand the actual needs of this local people, this underserved population, and to work with them so that we can build computing technologies that can actually help them actually address the needs that they have in their life. So it's less toward, designing and developing a technology and then building, a big business, being rich, like the sort of Silicon Valley culture that we are used to seeing these days. What are the what could be the alternative narrative of this scenario? How could we think about building technologies not for being rich ourselves, but for helping the underprivileged population around the world? So that was kind of my motivation for beginning this journey. So having this in my mind, way back in 2009 and 2010, I built a research group back in Bangladesh with the local undergraduate students there, who were wonderful, brilliant group of students. And I built the first ever human technology interaction lab in Bangladesh with these people. And we started to, working with different marginalized groups in Bangladesh, building technologies with them. Addressing, the projects that we were working on that time were building technologies for children with autism. We are building open source and free maps, open street maps for Bangladesh, technologies for women so that they can combat sexual harassment. All these projects were then starting to come off from the ground as this, these students, they were talking to different communities. They were trying to understand what are the problems that these societies, that different members of the societies are facing in their day-to-day life, and then bringing these problems back to our lab. And we were brainstorming and designing new kinds of technologies that could address those problems. And many of those technologies that we designed at the time in our lab in Bangladesh later actually came to reality. And some of the people that you are now seeing in the lab in their very, like a young stage, they are now very successful researchers, very successful entrepreneurs, and they have even technologies that have become unicorns, which you probably know that, one of the most successful startups. So these people are awesome. These people are great, and working with them give me a lot of opportunities to learn how to work with local people, how to work with marginalized people, how to understand their problems, and how to design a technology that can actually be used by this underprivileged population, many of whom do not have a lot of education, a lot of literacy. They don't even have enough access to technology. How we could address those problems and build technologies around it. So with these people and others for the last 12 years, I also have been working with different marginalized groups. On the top left, the picture that you are seeing is one of my, longest ethnography studies that I conducted, and still it's not finished, with the ready-made garments workers in Bangladesh. Many of you may know that Bangladesh is known for making clothes in this garments factory. And these workers there, they are one of the a most marginalized population around the world. In my ethnography, I was trying to understand what kind of problems these workers face in their day-to-day life, especially the women who are working there, how they are often being harassed, how they are often not getting the rights that the workers should get, and whether a technology can allow them to share experiences, unite together, and fight for their for worker rights. On the top right is a picture of my ethnography, which was conducted in India during 2015 or 16 here. I was working with this taxi drivers there. And it was also the time when this mobile phone applications, the ride sharing applications like Uber and Ola were just introduced in India. And these taxi drivers started to using those applications. I was trying to understand what are the difficulties these drivers were facing while using these applications, especially the older drivers, the drivers with less education, especially digital literacy, how they were coping up with this scenario, how the markets was tilted toward more young and tech-savvy drivers who were not as good as a driver, like if you think about driving, but they were better in using mobile phones, how that was becoming an issue here. So I went deeper into that problem. That was a study that I conducted with Microsoft Research India during 2015 and 16. On the picture left below, an ethnography field study that I was conducting in one of the slum areas in Dhaka. At that point, I was the slum dwellers there. They were facing the threat of an eviction. They are being thrown away because the city government was trying to build waterfront and for the beautification of the city. And they were completely ignoring the sufferings that these people, the slum dwellers, would be having if they were evicted. So I went there, I conducted this ethnography, and I was trying to understand how these people were thinking about relocating themselves from the place where they were living for last 20 years. And all of a sudden, within a notice of 1 week, they were told to leave their place, move to another place, how these poor people, they're planning for going to other place, what are the support they are getting, how technology could be built to create awareness, kind of slow down the government process of eviction, build a social media collective social media resistance against this problem, develop and a support system for these communities and all. The picture on the right bottom is another of my favorite ones, where I was working with this mobile phone fixers, the repairers who fix broken mobile phones in an underground market in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where I was trying to understand these people who do not have a fancy engineering degree, who are not schooled with this engineering education, how they were fixing sophisticated mobile phone technologies. If your smartphone is broken, how these low literate people without any engineering degree, how they were fixing them, and how this this kind of a local knowledge, the skills, the art and craft that they were putting in place for fixing this electronic devices could actually be considered as an element of engineering education. So that was something that I was starting at this point, and how we could think about developing technologies to help this population so that they could protect their knowledge, they can improve their knowledge, and they can share their knowledge with other people around the world. And I was also focusing on understanding how their work, this kind of a local technical work, were actually contributing toward reducing the electronic waste, reducing the amount of broken devices in the world, which has now become a big problem, which we call electronic waste. So as you can see from all these pictures, these are only 4 of this the projects that I was involved in last 12 years. But besides them, I have also been working with many other communities in many other countries, and I particularly focus on the people who are on the marginalized side of any incident. Try to understand the problem from their perspective, and I talk to them. I visit the places where they're in, their workplaces, their living places, and I observe how they are facing this problem with observation and contextual inquiries. When they do something, I ask them this question: why they are doing this? What are the trouble they are having? And oftentimes, I also get myself involved in their work to understand the problem myself. I work with these communities for months and sometimes for years to understand their problems, and then after understanding the problem in a very, like a clear-cut way, then I bring that to the lab for designing and developing technologies with these people and to deploy that in the field to understand whether that could help them. So my work does, falls in the intersection of two of the newest fields of computer science called human-computer interaction, or HCI, and information and communication technology for development, or ICTT. The way I work is I spend a lot of time in understanding the problem, which I call the problem identification stage. And then I focus on designing a technology that will create a long-term sustainability. And I define it in two ways. First of all, the technology that I build that will, last long. That is one of the goals. And the second goal for sustainability is that the technology that I build, the way I build it, is aligned with the idea of sustainable development. So the process of designing the technology, the hardware, the materials that I'm using for developing my technology, the people I'm involving in developing the technology, they are also the means of sustainable development. So even through the design and development process that I engage in, they are helpful. They are for the marginalized population. So I tend not to engage big Silicon Valley companies for building these technologies, although they could probably be able to building, a better working technology, but that would not allow these local people to be involved in designing this technology. That would not help their knowledge, that would not help their ownership on this technology. And that is definitely not aligned with the interest of sustainable development. So one of my primary foci of this of designing this technology is long-term sustainability, both in terms of the sustainability of the technology and the method that I use for building those technologies. And finally, I'm very, very, sensitive about the cultural impact of the technology. I understand that there are problems that you can solve with the use of technology, but oftentimes we do not understand the consequences of design of deploying a new technology in the field. The culture is one of the most important things for people's life, especially the people who are living in the global south. They value their culture. Sometimes bringing a technology destroys the long-standing culture of a community, which is harmful and problematic for them. So that's something that I also try to keep in mind. But saying this is easier than getting this actually done. So there are definitely several challenges associated with the projects that I conduct. So first of all, there is always a challenge of misreading the actual problem, because oftentimes, when I work with these marginalized communities, I appear as a person who is not from that community. And this is why I need to, deploy a lot of strategies, a lot of, methodological intervention to be one of them, to understand the problem, being a part of that community, conducting ethnography, conducting participatory, design workshop, and all of these things. And then another problem is, okay, so designing and developing technology for underprivileged population is not always easy because they do not have enough resources. And by resources, I do not only mean that they do not have, enough money. Oftentimes, they do not have enough infrastructural support like electricity or internet or like smartphones. Sometimes they are not literate enough. There's also an infrastructural challenge, infrastructural issue that we had to deal with. Then we have cultural barriers. Sometimes in some culture, people are not ready or they do not like to adopt a new technology. So that's a cultural barrier. And sometimes people do not know how to use this new technology. So there's a barrier in terms of training. There is also there are also corruption and politics, local politics that are involved in there that I had to work with, and that's definitely one of the big challenges in this space of deploying technology in the for social impact. And last but not the least, and this is something I often see and I feel bad about, is that even the researchers, wonderful researchers who build technology for marginalized communities, they build wonderful technologies, they give that to the communities, and then they disappear. Then who are going to maintain these technologies? Who are going to fix these technologies if they're broken? One of my favorite examples here is that I also, tell my students to get lessons from is One Laptop per Child project. That is a wonderful project that is started by MIT Media Lab in early 2000, where they build wonderful cheap laptops for the education of the children in the global South. But when they, give this laptop to the people in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and they, the laptop worked well for a few days, but their kids, they would often break the laptops. Then there weren't experts in those countries to fix those laptops. So after a few days, although the laptops were wonderfully designed, they could not serve these communities. And at some point, the maintenance and repair costs were so high, then these projects had to be abandoned. So those are real challenges in designing and deploying a technology for making a social impact, especially in global South with marginalized population. So addressing all these challenges, from understanding the problem to the maintenance and repair. So I draw inspiration from a lot of other disciplines other than computer science. So I read a lot from development sociology, critical theory, science and technology studies, political economy, and cultural anthropology to understand the culture, politics, economy, history, and the societal function of a particular community, which I call understanding people part. And then I bring them together for building technologies, where I focus on making the technology accessible, inclusive, robust, low cost, and secured. And in terms of computer science tools and techniques that I often use include graph theory, computational geometry, mobile computing, definitely natural language processing, and social media, AI. These are the things that we all use. And a bit of computer games to develop to make these technologies workable in this in the community. So I say that my research is a combination of ethnography and computing. Ethnography is the part of understanding people, and computing is the part where I actually develop the technology and deploy them in the field. And as Vukosi was mentioning in the beginning of the talk, that my research, the main theme of my research is voice. So the particular thing that I focus most on in my research is whether this community has a voice, like a free voice. So what do you mean by voice? So if you think about it, the modern age is an age of information. We get information from a lot of sources like social media, books, televisions, radios, newspapers. But how many times do you actually, find the voices of these people in your newspaper, on social media, the low literate people who cannot read and write? People don't talk about them. Their voice is absent in these platforms of information. Also, there are people who could probably be contributing to these information portals, but they don't talk because of different societal pressure. For example, think about the victims of sexual harassment. They do not talk about this problem because societal stigma. And then there are these workers who are often oppressed and who do not speak because of the fear of losing their job. Then there are refugees and immigrants who also do not talk because they try to hide their identities. So these are only a few examples of million others marginalized communities who are there around the world, who do not talk and whose information we do not get in even the mainstream, the information and data sources that we, that we work with as a computer scientist, we are interested in. And these are the people who I want to work with. So this is why my intention is to give voice to these people so that we can learn from them, we can learn from their problems, and then become able to design and develop technologies for them. So that is that process of empowering them to share their opinion, feelings, and experiences that I call voice. In a very theoretical term, I call this as a comprehensive socio-technical process for obtaining freedom. If you don't give people freedom, they are not able to speak up. And the reason I call this as a socio-technical process is because there is both a social part and a technical part involved in it. You just give someone technology, it doesn't mean that they will be able to speak. You also need to change the social condition around them so that they feel free enough and motivated enough to speak up. And to advance this process of voice, how to give people voice, when I approach marginalized communities, I ask this question that how can, first of all, we can make the technology accessible to all the members of this community. Then I focus on how to achieve social freedom, how I can change the social conditioning around a person so that they can speak up. So both the technical part and the social part. And then I try to think about, well, we also need to think about the sustainability. Someone speaks about something, but then if there is a consequence, then it's not actually, like a right way of helping them to speak up. So how we can make an infrastructure that is inclusive and sustainable, which can stay here and help people to develop, to practice this voice over the time, and that protects them, even if, protects them from any kind of repercussions. And definitely the visibility, a lot of underrepresented people around there. So, if they speak up, that, we need to make sure that their voice is not, become invisible, unheard, because there are so many louder voices around. So that's also, one of the main objectives of my research. So this is my research group today at University of Toronto, the Third Space Research Group. I'm very lucky to have people from all around the world, wonderful people who are also focusing on different marginalized communities around the world, including like the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and definitely in North America and Canada and US. So now I will particularly focus on this new project on COVID-19 and stigma that I have been working on in the last 1 year or so. I, now given my background of how I conduct the work, that you will conduct the research work, that you'll understand how I bring all of these related research questions together. So first thing first, let's try to understand what is a stigma. And to understand that, we take help from Wikipedia. This is the formal definition, Wikipedia definition of a stigma. It says social stigma is a disapproval of or discrimination against an individual or group based on perceived social characteristics that serve to distinguish them from other members of the society. Social stigmas are commonly related to culture, gender, race, socioeconomic class, age, sexual orientation, body image, intelligence, and health. So it's basically a process where we make some people in the society based on some of their characteristics different from others. And oftentimes this difference is based on their, their socioeconomic class, their race, their sexual orientation, their body image, how they look at, or their, physical or mental health. But why do we do that? What are the reasons why, we impose a stigma on a certain group of people? So to understand that, we need to know that stigma is not a problem of the person who we are stigmatizing, who the society stigmatizes. It is not a problem of that person, it's a problem of the society. So that is the number one understanding, that stigma is not a feature of a person who is stigmatized. For example, for a long time, people would stigmatize the people who have mental health problems, who are, would be called like mad or lunatic people. Now, if you think about this, this stigma is not that person's problem. That person might have a problem in their brain, but the reason why you are hating them, the reason why you are not including them in the society is not that person's problem. It's a problem of the society. And that is a stigma that we are talking about. It's a social problem. So stigma is a condition of the society. And the social scientists, for a long time, they tried to understand what were the reasons for this stigma, where the stigma is rooted in. And they found that stigma is rooted in politics. The reason why we stigmatize some people is because we believe that those people are risky, so that we cannot actually mix those people with other people in the community. For example, like stigma, there are like a long-standing stigma around mentally ill people, even in many countries, and these are like inspired by this colonial time, that people with mental health problems, they were actually imprisoned in different places, and in in a closed places, like animals, like or like people put animals in the zoo. That's a like a really inhuman attitude. The reason why they would do that is because they thought that if you like allow these people like in the society, they would not obey the rules, the law, because they are not careful of them, and they may harm other people. So harming other people is not always, neither of them is actually an actual case for all the people who have mental health problems, right? But people have this fear, and this fear is often propagated by the ruling class. If there is an oppressive, rulers of a country, and if they impose a law, they want that everyone in the country obeys that law. Now that all the people who are not mentally disturbed, is easy for the ruling class to make them obey the rules, and if not, they can punish them. But if a person who have like a mental health problems, they break the law, the government actually has nothing to do with them. And when these people are breaking the law in public, then that becomes a big problem. There's a demonstration of breaking the law and still having no consequence. It's not something that, like the ruling class people, they would like to see. So that's why they introduced this, they imposed a stigma on these people and told the society that these people are harmful to be mixed with, and they put them in a prison. Similar thing happened with the HIV. People with HIV, a lot of stigma around there was that if this is HIV is something that if you touch HIV affected people, then you'd also get HIV, and that has no scientific basis, nothing. But there is this HIV phobia that were there in the society, which propagated this stigma. So this way, when the social scientists look at the deeper cause of this stigma, they found that there has always been a deeper politics involved in this stigma. So what happens when this kind of stigma is propagated in a community, in a society? People lose their access to public services. If you're stigmatized, let's say you want to get into a public bus, other people won't allow you to let in. So that's the problem. You lose social empathy and support. If you're in a trouble, people are not going to help you. You get mental stress. Sometimes you start to hate yourself, and sometimes you also do self-harm, which is definitely a very problematic thing. Sometimes there are social conflicts, like two groups fight with each other because of the social stigma. So this is definitely a very problematic thing. Now, in the previous days, when technology was not that much prevalent, the computing technology, this stigma would take place in the real life, our working in the society. But with the popularity, with the rising popularity of social media, now social media has become the largest place for stigmatization. And people from marginalized groups are often stigmatized in the social media platform, including Twitter, including Facebook. And as we have seen over the time, in the last 10 or 15 years, there has been increasing amount of stigma against Black people, against Muslims, against like a fat or skinny people. There's like a body shaming. There is a stigma against people with autism or mental like a differences, and these are only a few examples. If you are on social media, you will see that there are many people who say like awful things about others who are different kind of differences in their lives. And because of this online stigma, the people who are being stigmatized, they do not find this online environment safe for them. So that limits their freedom of speech. They cannot speak freely. Sometimes they are victims of online harassment. If they say something somewhere, people start attacking them. People report their profiles. People harass them by sending nasty messages on their inbox. And also people spread out this kind of all kinds of like a misinformation, fake news around these people. And when these people are silent, then it's very easy for them to share and propagate biased information. So they make this whole online environment biased toward their opinion, because the other parties who they do not like, they are already ostracized from this online environment. And when this kind of like incidents keep happening, then the whole environment, online environment, become hateful, and that's hateful for all the people. Like it's not only for the people who are being stigmatized, even for general people, they find it like a toxic to be in an online environment where other people are saying nasty things about some marginalized groups. So these are the consequences, some of the consequences, negative consequences of online stigma. So now let's narrow it down toward this anti-Asian stigma during COVID-19. So many of us, we know that the way we know it, that COVID-19 it has one of the like the origins are thought to be coming from Wuhan in China. And that's why a lot of people were very angry with Chinese people or anyone who are Chinese descendants. And in North America, Chinese people are often called like Asian people, although Asia is a huge continent which have like all other nations there. But Asia, like Chinese and people from Japan, Korea, they are in general called Asian people in North America. So there was this like anti-Asian stigma that was spread out in the community at this when COVID-19 started to become a pandemic. And there were like different incidences of physical or verbal abuse against individual of Asian descent in real life, in the streets and the like different shops. People were attacking Asian people, Chinese people. There were like nasty incidents of harassment there, and then people were also attacking this Chinese people online. So this like started to rise, and even in Canada it became a huge problem. So then the researchers started to look into this problem, and they tried to see how this changed over the time. If you look at chart 1 and chart 2, you'll see that how that the perceived frequency of harassment and attacks based on race, ethnicity, or skin color in neighborhood and visible and minority group in 2020, you'll see that they're like the Chinese people weren't actually the top ones who would get victims of it. But with the advent of COVID-19, most of these hate incidents, they were happening against Chinese people. They kind of like went to the top. And also there were like Korean people who often look like Chinese people for many. And then there's Southeast Asian people who also often appear to be like them, the Filipino people, the Japanese people, West Asian people. You see that the hatred toward these people that went higher. So this was a really concerning event. That's when we wanted to understand why this is happening, and we found that there are people who were already started to looking at this problem, and previous efforts of analysis of COVID-19 related tweets and characterizing social media users, mapping geo distribution of COVID-19 related tweets, and prediction of the general sentiment in the tweets However, there is a gap for addressing anti-Asian stigma and hate speech from a computational perspective. All this work that has been done, they did like kind of like a qualitative study. They went to, Twitter, they, saw these incidents. They, probably like read a couple of tweets, a few tweets, they interviewed people and they tried to understand, what's happening there. So these are kind of like the early, evidences of COVID-19 stigma toward Chinese people. But trying to understand this in a more holistic way, understanding a lot this from by analyzing a large number of tweets that from a computational framework, that's a difficult problem that was not done till very recent. So we ask this research question: is there any repeating pattern of COVID-19 related stigma against Asian population from online communities? Which means that are there already existing stigma around Asian people that are now brought back during COVID-19? And if so, how can we detect and fight such a stigma against online communities? And what are the best technological solutions to help the intervention process? So first of all, we tried to design and develop an algorithm which can automatically, classify and automatically identify the hate speech toward Chinese people. So for example, for doing that, this is kind of our pathway for building the data set. So we first build a data set of, 670 million tweets. Then we manually extracted 62 potentially anti-Asian stigmatizing hashtags from it. And then we downloaded tweets containing either of these 62, like at least one of the 62 hashtags, and that give us 220K tweets. Then we manually coded 8K tweets randomly selected from this 220K. And then we used a topic modeling to understand what are the topics that people are talking about when they were using these nasty tweets. So then we got some tweets, and then we went back to the original data set to find more tweets which probably did not have those hashtags, so that we can get a richer set of tweets. And then that was our the version 2 data set with the improved. And then with the improved version is version 3 for automatic detection of the Asian stigmatizing language. And then we built like an extra quality data set with additional levels applied by humans. And now, what is under construction is building a plugin software, which I'll be talking about in a bit. So the dataset version 0 was gathered the tweets related to general COVID-19 topics, not necessarily on the topic of anti-Asian stigma, like any tweet that is talking about COVID-19 that was, included into our database. Actually, we merged 3 data sets collected by 3 people and made publicly available. First one is this Chen and Larman collection. Then the second is COVID-19 Twitter chatter dataset by Panacea Lab, and then this Harvard Dataverse. So when we merged all the tweets together, we got this 670 million tweets. So then our job was to find the problematic hashtags in those tweets, and we manually identified 62 potentially stigmatizing, like a hate speech kind of hashtags, which included Chinese virus, China virus, Kung flu. Even Donald Trump was the president of the United States. He used this very like a problematic term, Kung flu. Communist virus, Wuhan coronavirus, China light, Chinazi, Wuhan SARS, this kind of the hashtags. Then we crawled Twitter corpus based on this above mentioned 62 potentially stigmatizing hashtags and downloaded 220K tweets which had these hashtags, like either like one of these hashtags. So then we sampled, randomly sampled 8.7 kilo subset of this data set of version 1 and manually coded the tweets into one of the following categories. So when we were labeling them manually, we labeled them either they were clearly stigmatizing or they are clearly anti-stigmatizing. The anti-stigmatizing are the tweets where people are writing in response to someone said something bad. So those we call like anti-stigmatizing tweets. So we found like 19 of them. And then the factor of misinformation was kind of like, it's not stigmatizing, but they were just saying things which are pure lies about Chinese people. So those are like bulk of them were got into that category. And then there were political tweets which were criticizing Chinese people, but not necessarily for blaming them for COVID-19, but they were criticizing the a Chinese government, which we labeled as political. So we also ran a topic modeling algorithm, basically, like a TLDA algorithm on this data set, and to find most prominent discourse around COVID-19 and Asian population. And using the results in the 2 steps above, we extracted an extensive list of keywords related to COVID-19 and anti-Asian stigma. And we found that there are 2 kinds of stigma there. One was cultural stigmatization and one was political stigmatization. So how are these 2 different? In the cultural stigmatization, people were basically attacking Chinese culture. They were saying that Chinese people are so bad, they eat all the animals, their wet market is really bad, they eat, snakes and rats and all this, bats, all these problematic things. So it's kind of like demeaning and saying nasty things about their culture. But political stigmatization is a bit different. Here they're saying that, okay, we're not talking about their culture. We're basically saying that these people are evil. They purposefully build this bioweapon and they purposefully spread this virus around the world for killing so many people. So if you think about this, these 2 stigmatizations are fundamentally different. One is attacking Chinese civilization, and the second one is attacking the Chinese politics. So we conducted additional analysis on this data set that, further classification, we found that the number 1 stigmatization came from the wet market and eating habits, where a lot of tweets were about how bad are the Chinese people, their wet markets and, their eating habits are very bad. Then definitely COVID-19 cases, they're saying that China is so bad, look at them. There are so many people who are dying in China for COVID-19. The third one, as I was saying, is a more, a political type, and it's saying that, well, China purposefully built this bioweapon for killing people around the world. Then the fourth one is that there is a, conspiracy theory that there is a virus lab in Wuhan from where they actually, synthesize this virus and then spread that around the world. And then there are criticism around Chinese government. Yep.
Oh yeah, sorry. Because we're gonna start running a bit late, so I don't know if you can try maybe wrap.
Oh yeah. So I'm give me a couple of minutes, I'll wrap it up. Okay.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
this is. Sure, thanks. So there's like some of the types of stigma that we found in our data. Then we further refined the data, and here are some examples that China, you should be ashamed and then threatened, and there should always be an an asterisk next to anything that China says. So there are different examples that we found from this insight. And it's, we also wanted to see how this distribution of this sensitive data that changed over the time. And we found that there are kind of like consistent level of hatred toward Chinese people that were coming in Twitter, although their topics are often being different. We improved this quality of this data and analysis. This is the process is still going on. And additional analysis on this data set 3, we found that this, we are kind of keeping track of which data set are stigmatizing and non-stigmatizing on which topic where they're coming. We found that, a lot of time now people are responding to this kind of stigma and they're explaining people that why that is wrong, which is a great sign. Our own model, the BART model that we use, they kind of worked well. We compared that with Gaussian knife and random forest classifiers. It worked good for better for compared to all these models. And this BART model that we are using, this is giving us a high accuracy and precision. We are also trying to emphasize here is that with some of the students of University of Toronto that we need both humans and computers for solving this problem, because a lot of this kind of leveling are being done by Chinese communities themselves. We are collaborating with them. They are actively helping us to find these tweets that we are fitting to our analysis, and we are trying to find whether the hatred has any kind of correlation or causal relation with some of these political events like this election of United States or some political leader or celebrity, they say something. So basically, these are our main contribution to having an automatic tool to find out, to identify the anti-Asian tweets and then classify them. We are now trying to build a web plugin which automatically will find this kind of anti-Asian hatred in a website. And the thing that we are trying to build, sorry. I beg your pardon. So the software keyboard is most likely the thing that we're trying to build is like Grammarly. In Grammarly, if you have used it, if you write something grammatically wrong, they underline it and tell you where it is wrong and how you can write a better sentence. We're trying to build something like Grammarly, where if you say something which is hateful or which has a misinformation, it will underline that and explain to you that it's wrong, and you should probably write something which is better. So that's something that we are working on now. So yeah, so that was all for me today. Sorry for running a bit late, but I'll be very happy to take your questions or if you have any feedback or suggestions for me.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ishtiaque. I think that's very interesting. Are there any questions from the room before I ask mine? You can either unmute yourself and then ask your question. I'll kick it off. I think, I don't know, there was a future collaborator who was on here who's also working on hate speech on the African continent. So I think he just dropped off. I don't know why. So can you maybe talk a little bit about, especially going through the process of the multiple data sets? Was that at every time identifying that you weren't really meeting your goal and then trying to then move on to the next thing to try it again?
So that's a very good question. So that was the the way we would do that.
You might want to just stop sharing your screen. So that, yeah.
Sure. Okay. All right, it's better now. Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, so that was basically the way we would do that before. So every time an incident happened, we would try to find out how we can get the data, create our own data set, or to look at other people's data set and merge them together. These days, we kind of built an AI algorithm which automatically does that. So if we already have a data set and a merged data set, based on that, it builds intelligence so that if a new data set comes, it only extracts the important data set that could actually, change the understanding that we have on this data set. One of the inspiration that we are getting, Stanford University's projects called Snorkel, which was giving, this similar kind of insight. Okay. Yeah, but that's a good question.
Yeah, there's a question here, and I think from Tope, who says, how do you identify your research questions and solve them?
That's a great question. So, these days, oftentimes the research problems come with the community, the people that we are working with, and the way I solve is basically, I would say I don't solve it. Is basically I work with the people and they solve it. I just try to help them. But one thing that I focus a lot is on understanding the problem. So I spend a lot of time with these people. I allow them to talk and to explain the problems by themselves instead of I interpret the problem for them. Even for this particular project, we have been working with a Chinese, NGO who are helping us with, identifying the tweets. So we went to them and we tell them which tweets are actually problematic for them. From an outsider, I don't know which are, attacking you. They were identifying the tweets and we are basically working with them for solving this thing. So I think that kind of community engagement is very important if you want to work with different marginalized groups.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks. If there are other questions, you can put them in the chat. I think we'll go over for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes. The other thing is in this case is, so we have a challenge here that what the social media companies are not catching up to this, especially obviously this is a population that is not within the mainstream of North America. And then if you now think about global South, in most cases, then you're thinking also about other languages, right? So if you now have things like hate speech or stigma that is in a foreign language, how do you feel from now as a computer scientist? What would have to happen from a policy perspective to try and resolve some of these things?
That's a very good question, Vukosi. We also think about this in our lab and in many of the discussions that appear. One of the ways that people suggest is that, which is kind of like decentralizing these platforms, which means that there should be, for example, like a version of Twitter for South Africa, or like different communities in South Africa governed by those people, and the data would be owned by the members of this community. That would be the ideal version of it, but as you mentioned, these commercial companies would not allow us to do that because their business would be cut off. The other ways, that's why we like now we are looking at is building this kind of plugins where probably the data will still be there on Twitter. Twitter will not put them down even if these are problematic. But can we use these plugins which will automatically remove this data from this community members view of the stream? And plugin that we built for the Muslims in Canada, for example, if they install this tweets, they would not see anything like anti-Islamic, like hateful speech on their screen. And if they see something, they report, and next time that will be eliminated from the screen. So that way, you do not change the Twitter because that's difficult, but you can still have some kind of an impact on what you see.
Okay. I think that leads me to my last question. And guys, if there's a question before we close off, let me know. Yeah, so we've seen from, okay, and this is again going towards the platforms, that platforms have then in the case of once you get to what you're doing in terms of now either putting in a plugin or either building tools that can help people, that they most likely will ban you from being able to access those services. So I don't know for you now, what maybe how are you guys thinking about that as researchers? Because that's one of the concerns. Like we also work on Twitter data with things, and one of the things we're worried about is then getting that, oh, you are no longer allowed to access our platform. I guess
like for the long-term sustainability, these communities, they need to have their own server, own cloud, own data, like a system. Without data sovereignty, without the ownership of the data that is being produced by the community members, it's very hard to come up with any kind of conversations, even these big companies. So I would say, like in the small level, we can think about this app or like this small interventions. But for a like a longer sustainability, we have to think about giving the empowerment to the people there in the communities.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ishtiaque. I think this was
it was my pleasure.
For a couple of the community, I think also when we share this out, especially on the Masakane community that looks at natural language processing, there will be a couple of people who are really interested in seeing, and Paul, hopefully they will reach out. I will encourage them.
I'd be very happy.
And seeing how this could be kind of like extended to other communities. I think it is an important piece of work, and I myself look forward to reading more of the papers more deeply over the next few weeks, so that I'll come back and reach out to you and then see if we can have more discussions around this. So thanks everyone. This was, as I said, the last of these seminars for this year. Enjoy your holidays in the next month. Stay safe, and we'll come back next year. Thanks, Ishtiaque, and enjoy the rest of the day. And good morning.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye.